Howdy, my good friends. I'm Larry Bentley, and I was born and raised in the Appalachian Mountains by generations of mountain folk who passed down the stories you're fixing to hear. Together, we'll look through the eyes of an Appalachian at the murders, mysteries, legends, and forgotten history of these old mountains. Every now and again, we'll wander a little beyond them, too. Welcome to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend. In a place where tempers stretch tighter than a banjo string over a man's livelihood, well, it didn't take much to turn neighbors into enemies. And once bodies started turning up, fear rose to the top like cream in a fresh milk jug. This is the story of the Kentucky Night Rider, the first night ride. Hope you're doing well today, and thank you so much for stopping by. Now, I want to tell you something a little different today. This story don't come out of the mountains of West Virginia or the hollers of eastern Kentucky. Well, though it feels like it could have. No, sir. This one comes out of the flat, rich tobacco country of western Kentucky, where the fields real wide and the soil runs dark, and the money grows right off that stalk. That is, if you can get somebody to pay you fair for it. And that right there was the whole blame problem. Because around the turn of the 20th century, tobacco farmers in that part of Kentucky started figuring out something it wasn't quite lining up in the financial category. The price they were getting for the crop, what they'd worked all year to grow, cut, hang, and cure with their own blood, sweat, and tears, was dropping lower than a coon in a corn crib. They call it the Black Patch. And if you ever want to understand just how trouble starts in rural America, well, remember this. When a man feels like his work ain't worth nothing, he's already halfway to doing something about it. About it, meaning ain't going to stand for it come hell or high water. So today I'm kicking off a series called Shadows in the Black Patch, because this one's got some more terms in it than one episode could ever cover. And by golly, every bit of it's worth telling. And I'm going to tell you a story about what happens when men feel shorted and tempers heat up hotter than a forest fire on the 4th of July. You might just get a flash of mountain coal miner in your mind as you hear this one. Kind of the same situation, just a different product. So come on in, take your shoes off and set a spell while I tell you about how this mess got real ugly real quick. Now, back in them days, tobacco wasn't just a crop, it was everything. What became known as a cash crop for some folks. It bought shoes for the young'un. It kept the roof patched and food on the table when the garden come up a little short. And when the big tobacco companies started squeezing the price down, farmers didn't just get poor. They got desperate. So they formed something called the Planters Protective Association. At first, it was supposed to be a nice, peaceful way to stand together and hold crops back. That way, they could get a better price for it. And anybody that's worked tobacco knows what I mean when I say that. But peace and desperation, well, they don't always get along too good. And some hard heads can't be talked to. They have to be shown, and they have to be shown the hard way. If they can't hear, well, by golly, they can sure enough feel, as my daddy used to say. And somewhere along that pig path, a second group sprung up, forming in the dark of night. These men believed that waiting wasn't working, and all the being nice done already failed like a water pail made out of straw. These men became known as the Night Riders. Now, they didn't ride like some kind of army. There weren't no uniforms, bugles, banners, or drums. Just plain old-fashioned darkness, horses, and men who'd done decided that fear was a language everybody understood. At first, they were more like warnings on 4 legs. They'd ride up on a farm in the middle of the night, knock on the door, and tell a man he had one simple choice: quit selling tobacco outside the association, else something bad's fixing to happen to him. Sometimes they'd put a period on that sentence by leaving a burnt barn. Sometimes they figured that a period wasn't good enough. They needed an exclamation point by dragging the poor farmer out of his bed in the middle of the night and whipping him to within inches of his life right there in front of his own front yard, in front of his family, while watched in horror while his barn was on fire in the background. Sometimes, if the farmer was lucky, they'd just leave a message and didn't need any explaining at all. And for a while, well, that was enough to keep folks in line. That was until it wasn't. After all, when you're sitting on a good crop, refusing to sell it as it starts going bad, all the while them young'uns is getting more hungry by the day, there ain't a daddy maid that won't do something to fix that situation. Now, I want to slow down here a bit, because this is where the story really changes. Because once after fear starts being a tool, it never stays pointed in one direction. It starts turning into something else heavier and harder to control. Sometimes, when men that ain't never held any power start getting it, they wield it like a man that just found out he's pulling the trigger. And in the Black Patch, that's exactly what happened. First thing that really shook folks' foundation didn't happen in a big city courtroom or some crowded street. It happened real quiet out on the river, on a cold stretch of water where the old Cumberland River runs slow and dark like it's got secrets it don't plan on giving up too easy. The man's name was Captain Quentin Rankin. He was a respected physician, a tobacco buyer, and a man who knew both sides of the business and had somehow, I guess, managed to stay on speaking terms with most of the people in both of them. But when it looks like you're working both sides against the middle in a place like the Black Patch, well, that might not be the safest place in the world to be standing. Folks might say that it makes you twice the target you already are. The details of what happened to Captain Rankin come down through history in pieces, like broken glass found along a riverbank. But we do know that he was traveling by boat along that old Cumberland River. Somewhere along the way, masked men stepped up out of the dark. It ain't clear if they rode up on a boat or caught him walking around the riverbank looking for a bush to do his business. But these men didn't announce themselves. They weren't there to talk things out. To them, there weren't no ratchet jawing going to unscrew their cord. By that time the night was over, well, Captain Rankin was gone. It wasn't long before that old Cumberland River spit Captain Rankin out like a hot piece of grandma's pie that done scorched his tongue. And what started out as a rumor in the tobacco fields became something else entirely. Not just intimidation or protest, but now they'd done dragged murder into it. Now, what that meant in 1907 Western Kentucky wasn't like it is today, where news spreads in seconds and folks go plumb haywire over the news. This was slower than maple syrup in the wintertime and meaner than a Brahma bull in a barnyard. Back in the day, news spread by what we know as the mountain Wi-Fi system, which was word of mouth, or by newspaper print that sometimes told the story straight, but sometimes added a little extra edge depending on whose fingers were dancing around the typewriter that day. But when folks read that a respected man had been dragged off into the dark by masked riders and popped up as a floater in the river, well, that's when the fear changed shape. Because now it wasn't just tobacco prices anymore. It was about what kind of men were riding at night and what they were willing to do. Investigators started pushing harder and digging deeper, and the state started paying attention too. All of a sudden, what had been just whispered about in tobacco barns was now fixing to be argued in courtrooms. Some said Captain Rankin was targeted because of his ties to tobacco buyers, whilst other folks said it was punishment for refusing to cooperate with the association. Now, I reckon it's more like making an example of him than it was punishing him, because I don't expect he learned a whole lot from the whole thing. And some folks held their mouths sideways where nobody could hear it too good, and said the whole thing was growing into something worse than either of them two things. It was a grassroots movement that done drove itself into a ditch like a drunk old farmer on Saturday night that done lost his original reason for being around. And it done found a new one in fear, intimidation, and murder. Now, I want to pause here and tell you something. because if you're listening to this thinking it sounds like a simple case of good guys and bad guys, well, it weren't. Most of the men involved in this weren't some out-of-town strangers shipped in to do dirty work. They were neighbors, church members that worked in the same soil, drank from the same wells, and buried their dead in the same ground. That's what makes this kind of story stick in your bones a little bit, because it don't feel far away. It feels close enough to reach out and grab you by the scruff of the face and drag you right into it, work boots and all. After Captain Rankin's death, Black Patch, well, it didn't settle down. It tightened down like a ratchet strap on a flatbed trailer hauling a load of cages filled with Buff Orpington cluckers. You might say it even tightened down a little too far. More raids came, more barns burned, more men disappeared into rumor instead of official record. Folks started locking doors earlier, and they quit asking who might be riding around after nightfall. That was about the time the lawmen realized that they weren't dealing with just a handful of criminals. Heck, they was dealing with something bigger and a whole lot darker. Something that done spread itself through the whole area like smoke through a holler. And that, my good friends, is where we're going to pick up this story next time. Because what happened after Captain Rankin's murder wasn't the end of the Night Riders. No, folks. It was the beginning of the part that nobody knew was coming and nobody could control anymore. The part where fear stopped being a tactic and flat turns into a way of life, because folks thought Captain Rankin's murder was, well, as bad as things could get. It wasn't. They hadn't seen Eddyville, they hadn't seen Princeton, and Lord knows they hadn't seen Hopkinsville yet. So pull your chair a little closer next time, because we're going to follow this thing and wade in deeper into the Black Patch, right into the burning, the trials, and the night rides that made Western Kentucky one of the most dangerous places in the whole blame U.S. Till then, my good friends, keep your lantern lit and your ears open, because out of the dark, well, some riders never stop riding. Hope you got something out of our story today. If you did, please rate and review the podcast, or if you're watching on YouTube, Spotify, or Rumble, throw us a like, and don't forget to subscribe or follow wherever you watch or listen. Come on over to Appalachian Murder, Mystery, and Legend podcast group on Facebook, where we talk Appalachian about anything else you want to talk about. I'll be back real soon with another Appalachian Murder, Mystery, or Legend. I'll see you then.